Central to the impeachment case against Trump and the ongoing political narrative that 1/6 was some sort of new 9/11 is the idea that the day was murderous, that the mob wasn't just thirsty for a photo op, they were thirsty for blood, and they got it, supposedly, with Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who we've been told until now was brutally beaten with a fire extinguisher. That is the case that's in the article of impeachment itself, referenced on more generic terms. Incited by Trump, the crowd killed law enforcement personnel. In a pretrial memo making their case last week, Democrats were much more specific, saying insurrectionists killed Brian Sicknick by striking him in the head with a fire extinguisher. That is a clear-cut claim for which you would assume there is clear-cut evidence. But if so, why is there no clear-cut arrest? Over 200 people have been identified or arrested or are sought for arrest for crimes related to the riot, but not one of them for the most high-profile crime of the day. If the House impeachment managers can so confidently bring what is effectively an accessory to murder charge, why can't prosecutors confidently demonstrate the murder? And they can't, or at least they're having major trouble doing so. Last week, CNN very quietly reported that investigators are struggling to build the murder case in Brian Sicknick's death. Quote, vexed by a lack of evidence that could prove someone caused his death. So yet again, we are almost certainly watching a political narrative hastily crafted to serve a particular use, and then it'll be thrown in the trash long before the facts ever have a chance to catch up. And obviously, I say that with all due respect to Brian Sicknick's family. They say they don't want politicization of Brian's life or death. They just want to know what happened. Agreed. I think we all do. And to the extent that what happened to Sicknick is being used as a political tool to advance certain political interests and punish others, we all as Americans have a right to know, at least in general terms, what provably happened to him and what almost certainly didn't. There are several pieces of great analysis released this week, assembling everything we know. Hat tip to this story over at Revolver, Andrew McCarthy at National Review, Ala Pundit at Hot Air, and Matt Walsh at the Daily Wire, among others, asking actual journalistic questions and assembling demonstrable facts instead of just forwarding the propaganda to be obeyed. Together, these stories provide a combination of important facts that all demonstrate one thing. Almost certainly, we were not told the truth about this supposed fire extinguisher beating that is now the commonly known and accepted story for what happened. Except it didn't. That has been the story since the New York Times reported it on January 8th. This report, in fact, is the lone supporting citation made in the House impeachment manager's pretrial memo. Brian Sicknick died when he was overpowered by the mob, struck in the head with a fire extinguisher, resulting in a bloody head wound. He was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support, but according to whom? According to the New York Times trademarked anonymous sources, of course. For a story with that many specifics and a scene with probably thousands of cameras recording every possible angle of every possible interaction, it's really suspicious there is apparently no photo or video evidence of such claims. Investigators are looking, but they can't find any, according to the CNN report. There is some footage of a Capitol rider throwing a fire extinguisher at a group of officers. That video was previously reported as possibly the incident which killed Sicknick, but now it can't be, since currently investigators are saying they have yet to identify the moment in which Sicknick suffered his fatal injuries. Okay, but just because we can't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen, sure, but even if there aren't photos or video, the claim is blunt trauma. And who would see that? Is a medical examiner. Yet curiously, the DC medical examiner has released no information, and a law enforcement source speaking with CNN says medical examiners did not find signs that Sicknick sustained any blunt force trauma. The story says medical personnel simply don't believe the fire extinguisher reports. And not only that, but if you've been bludgeoned to a near-death state, you're probably not just sitting around the office doing self-assessments and casually texting people. Yet that is exactly what happened. The original New York Times report says Sicknick was rushed to the hospital, implicitly from the Capitol building, but that clearly isn't true. Why? Because the statement from the Capitol Police reads that Sicknick returned to the Capitol Police office building, presumably under at least some of his own power, because from the office building, hours after the attack, he texted his brother Ken saying he was fine, in good shape, just got pepper sprayed twice, This before he apparently collapsed at the police office building and was then taken to the hospital. If you had a bloody gash clubbed into your head by a fire extinguisher, you're probably not just sitting around texting your brother about how you're in good shape. This piece of evidence, in combination with the total lack of photo or video evidence, in combination with sources saying there were no signs of blunt trauma, it's a safe conclusion that the fire extinguisher story just didn't happen. So what did? Several pieces of evidence point to a stroke or a blood clot issue. There was reporting at the time citing Capitol Police sources saying Sicknick suffered a stroke, a claim repeated to Tucker Carlson by a police union source. That was also what Brian's brother Ken says he was told the day after the riot. And strokes and blunt force injury aren't mutually exclusive, of course. Strokes are actually a serious risk after traumatic injury. So it's not that a stroke happening means trauma didn't. It's that all the other evidence points against traumatic injury. So was the stroke pure happenstance then, or was it the result of some sort of attack? We don't know. But investigators are reportedly working on a new theory that, at least to me, sounds like quite a stretch. Granted, I never went to medical school, but neither did these investigators, and neither did the journalists, and neither did the politicians grasping at any straws they can. According to another CNN report on Wednesday, investigators are now apparently working on this new theory that Capitol attackers sprayed Sicknick with either a pepper spray or a bear spray, and this irritant caused Sicknick to suffer a fatal reaction, presumably the stroke or the blood clot. Now, I've never heard of pepper spray causing a stroke, but it is apparently a possibility. According to an ER doctor quoted in this USA Today piece about protests from last summer, it's an old piece, so we know it's not a current distortion or misrepresentation to further this particular narrative. When inhaled, pepper spray can cause a sudden elevation in blood pressure, which can lead to a stroke or a heart attack. So maybe that could happen. The only thing that makes me skeptical is the word sudden in that description. It wasn't a sudden elevation in blood pressure that caused Brian Sicknick's stroke or blood clot, or at least the stroke or blood clot didn't happen suddenly. It happened hours after the pepper spraying, but maybe the elevation in blood pressure lasts that long. I don't know. Not my area of expertise. But even if that is what happened, it's tough to frame that honestly within the murderous insurrection narrative it's been crammed into. Pepper spray is not a murder weapon. You can assault someone with it, sure, and perhaps Brian Sicknick was assaulted with it, but nobody sprays it with the intent to kill. That's the entire point of it. It's a non-lethal weapon by design. And if your intent is to overthrow the government on top of the murder, it's a very odd weapon choice to make. And that's not to excuse or deny other crimes. We know that police sustained serious injuries. We know criminal conduct was committed that day. Brian Sicknick probably was a victim of such criminal conduct to some degree. It's just to say that we have all been sold a demonstrably false narrative to serve a political interest. And not only that, but we can eliminate negligence or haste as explanations for this false story as well. This wasn't just some rush to judgment before better information became available. This deception has been done with specific intent the entire time. How do we know? Because none of the information I just presented is actually new. It's been hiding in plain sight the entire time. The stroke explanation for Brian Sicknick's death was first reported on January 8th. The fact that Sicknick was not rushed to the hospital. He went to an office building first. That's been known since January 7th. Sicknick's text exchange with his brother saying he's fine and never mentioning a fire extinguisher. That has also been publicly known since January 8th. All of these facts have been available for weeks, but we're only just now learning of them. And the reason we're only just now learning of them is because journalistically minded people actually started to assemble them. In the meantime, we have had a politically manufactured lie, cherry-picked from one anonymous source and uncritically amplified by media allies, because they're nothing but propaganda megaphones for the party, while truths with demonstrable evidence to the contrary have just been sitting around without attention in lesser trafficked corners of the internet. The truth has been out there, waiting patiently. It's just few people actually bothered to look for it. And that's because these aren't people looking for the truth. These are people, ironically and metaphorically, looking to club you over the head and into submission. Every piece of this story has been selected and emphasized or totally ignored according only to its use for that purpose. Any serious effort at the facts would have acknowledged the conflicting reports and evidence. But a serious effort at control moves far too quickly for that sort of honesty ever to become an obstacle at all. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Come on.